It's make or break time for a bunch of Wisconsin football players on offense and defense. Which players need to make a move this offseason, this spring, and this fall to avoid getting passed over on the depth chart?
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Locked On Badgers. You are locked on to your first source for Wisconsin Badgers content every day. We thank you so much for being here. On today's show, we're going to jump into which players on offense and defense for the Wisconsin football team need to make a move right now, or they risk getting passed over. We also talk a little bit about the transfer market, and was last year's transfer market successful for the Wisconsin basketball team? Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. All right, let's jump into the first topic we want to talk about, last year's transfer market. So we talked a ton about this year, what the Badgers basketball team and Greg Gard need to do. Tons of openings, tons of spots to fill. We're going to get into those spots as they fill them, break down everybody coming in. But I want to take a second and look at last year, right? Was last year's transfer market successful? Did Greg Gard, looking back in hindsight, were the players they brought in, was that something that actually worked, right? Because we talk a lot about the players coming in this year, like everybody we bring in is going to hit. Everybody we bring in, Greg Gard is going to find the right buttons to push. And I think there's a little fan optimism there that doesn't always reflect reality. Not every transfer is a hit. So let's look back at last year. What did the Badgers do last year? They brought in Jahcobi Neath, right? The guard out of Wake Forest. And they brought in Chris Vogt, the big man, and coming out of Cincinnati. Successful? What do you guys think? For me, Vogt was a home run. Okay, even though he didn't have a big statistical impact, you got to remember what he was brought in here to do. Chris Vogt was brought in to provide reliable depth off the bench at the 5 spot, a guy who was going to bring toughness, some size, rebounding, a little bit of scoring in the post, and he did all of that. Frankly, I think he should have played more. I think he was underplayed, especially at the end of the season. Vogt averaged about 13, 14 minutes per game. But he had some really key moments throughout the course of the season. He had 9 points in an early win against Indiana. He went off against Nebraska late in the season. Now, it was really instrumental in that game. And quite frankly, his game against Iowa State to end the season, obviously the loss, I thought he was playing the best basketball of his Badger season right there. And he should have played more. Right. He had a couple big time blocks. He was showing on defense. He's aggressive on the glass. I think he outplayed Crowell in that game. And the fact that he didn't get more minutes, to me, was very frustrating. So I think if you were to grade Chris Vogt and what he did here, and did Gard successfully identify a player? Did they successfully implement him into the system? Did he mesh with the culture? That's an A. Right. And again, why this is important is next year is going to be even more leaning on transfers. We have to hit on them. So it's important to look back and say, does the staff do a good job of that? And not every staff does. I think in Chris Vogt's case, Greg Gard nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. So let's look at Jahcobi Neath then. And Neath is a little different. Chris Vogt came over with 1 year. It basically left. It was his last season. We were going to get almost a mercenary type of situation, one and done. Neath is a little different. Neath has a couple years left in the program. He came over as a sophomore. Still a little underwhelming, right? Like Wisconsin definitely brought Jahcobi Neath in to fill a big role coming off the bench as a scoring guard, someone who could play maybe even a little bit of a combo guard, maybe even a little bit of the 3. If you think back to what Khalil Iverson did at Wisconsin, I think the hope was that Neath wouldn't be Khalil Iverson, obviously, who has a different athleticism set and a different body type. But I think the hope was that Neath could come in and kind of play across several positions and be an athletic disruptor similar to Khalil Iverson. And it just didn't happen. Like he played 9 minutes a game. He shot really poorly, both from 2 and from 3. And his shot was always advertised as a little inconsistent coming in. But even then, he shot 20-something% from 3. That's just not going to cut it. And there's a lot of things to dive into with Neath. He battled injuries for much of the year. He obviously took a while to get going. He just had knee surgery, which is another thing we want to talk about. I mean, we don't know the severity of that yet, but I think it's probably something that he's been dealing with the entire season. right? And I think there's been a lot of issues this year that have really kept Neath from fully integrating into, what the coaching staff's plan was. But that being said, did it work out last year? No, it didn't. It did not provide the depth or fit the need that Wisconsin had when they targeted Neath. And if you look back to the end of the season, when after Lauren Bowman had left the program again, there was nothing there. There was nothing on the bench. We've talked about this. We're not going to beat that dead horse anymore. But the team desperately needed a guard to be able to come off the bench, provide some scoring punch, especially with Hepburn down at the end against Iowa State. And Neath it didn't work. So if you grade the Chris Vogt transfer in as an A, I mean, I got to think the Neath transfer, you're not going to grade that as an F, at least in my opinion. I think that's unfair, but it's a C, maybe a little lower. Again, you have to factor in the fact that he was hurt and he still has a couple years left. And the book is not written on Jahcobi Neath for sure as a Wisconsin Badger. Absolutely not. Like, he still retains athletic skills and abilities that are unique on this roster. He's a big body guy. He has shown the ability to hit some threes, although not at a consistent enough clip. But if the 3-point shooting can hover a little higher, his athletic ability will still play. I think long term he's probably not a starter for Wisconsin unless he improves kind of dramatically, to be honest. I don't think he's a starter for Wisconsin, but I think he could be a valuable bench piece for sure. But yeah, so you look back at last year's transfer market and it's kind of a mixed bag, which again brings us to this year, right? Because this team needs transfers. If we want to be in this spot next year, talking about the Wisconsin Badgers basketball team as a success or a failure, it's really a lot of it is going to hinge certainly more than this year on the impact that 2, 3, maybe 4 transfers have on this program. And that's wild. That's an absolutely huge rebuilding task for Greg Gard and that staff, and they have to nail it. And again, they can't hit. The reason I kind of wanted to bring this up is they can't hit 50%. If you look back at what happened last year, what they needed, I think they hit 50% on the transfer market. The Neath thing just didn't work last year. And maybe it'll work next year. It's not a one-off for Neath for sure, but they have to hit 75%. They almost have to bat 1,000 for this to be a really good team next year. And that's going to be really tough. And I wonder if people are starting to just kind of gloss over the fact that it's really hard to not only find the right guys on the transfer market, to identify them, then to land them. But then you also have to make sure they integrate into the culture, that they are fit for the scheme, that you coach them up, they're ready to go immediately. They mesh with the players coming back, Hepburn and Wall and Crowell. It's a big to do. Will they get it? Will they pull it off? I don't know. They're in on a bunch of kids. They've been linked to a bunch of kids. A lot of interesting targets out there. We've talked about needs before. It's going to be an incredibly fascinating offseason. But to pull it off and to make it a successful offseason, Gard has to hit on a higher percentage than he did last year. All right, coming up, guys, something that we really wanted to get into. There's a bunch of players on this roster, a bunch of players who this is really their make or break year, right? They are upperclassmen with young guys breathing down their back, and they have not carved out a role yet. We're going to get into some of the players that need to make noise right now, or they risk getting passed over in their Wisconsin football career. But first, today's show, as always, is brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar is one of my favorite post-workout, pre-workout, just all-day kind of snacks. You throw it in the backpack. It's incredibly healthy. It tastes good. It's 100% chocolate. It's not like candy bars where it just leaves you feeling bloated and blah and dragging. No. Built Bar contains 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And the flavors are incredible. What I do, which I think makes the most sense, is you get the variety pack. And then with the variety pack, you're getting the brownie, the coconut, the almond, white chocolate cookies and cream. There's a banana cream pie, which I absolutely love. And it's guilt-free. It tastes great. What they've done at Built Bar is really make something that's tasty and then figure out how to get it healthy. I'm not going to throw any names out there, but we've all had the other protein bars in the market, right? We've all had the ones that taste like cardboard, that taste like chalk, and you just down them because you know you're doing a good thing, but it is painful. Built Bar is the antithesis of that. It's the opposite of that. Sorry, not the antithesis. It's the opposite of doing that. It is all about the taste. They make it delicious every time they pull it off, and they built a community around helping you on your fitness journey, on your nutritional journey. It's something you're going to want to be a part of. It's what we do here. I can't recommend it enough. And on top of that, you get a special offer. For listening to this show, for being a part of our community, you go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order at built.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get podcasts. All right, let's jump into this next topic, and I teased it a little bit earlier. We want to talk about some of the make or break players. We're going to start with defense. We got a few players lined up. Now, these are guys, let me explain what I mean by make or break. These are guys that really are in a position, if they don't make a move right now and carve out significant playing time right now, this season, starting in spring practice, carrying over to fall, they're probably not going to have that. They're probably not going to get that role at Wisconsin. It just is what it is. This is the life cycle of football, right? College football. There's always young kids coming up, and there's always older players who you like, and you really were excited when they committed, and they're good players, but they're just they just don't ever carve out a role. And eventually those players either transfer, and I'm not suggesting any of these guys are going to transfer, but this is what happens. This is the reality of where we're at. And if high-level players can't carve out playing time and younger players are bypassing them, those players transfer usually, or they just get buried and they never play. So it's not seniors, right? And there's no seniors on these lists because seniors, it really, by definition, there's not going to be here next year anyway. So these are guys who have to carve out roles now if they're going to remain on the program, probably. So the first one, let's get into inside linebacker on defense. There's a couple guys here, Spencer Lytle and Maema Njonmeta. The first name of that always trips me up a little bit, but two guys who are both juniors, okay? Both guys who have been in the program for a couple years, both guys with a lot of early hype. Spencer Lytle has played at outside linebacker quite a bit. If you remember, they moved him to inside linebacker this year because they're trying to find a role for him. By the way, that's a double-edged sword. When a coaching staff moves a player around, right, a lot of times it's because he's buried at the spot he's at and they don't see playing time, but it's also because they like him. Usually they're trying to find a role for him. They're trying to find some place to fit him in. I mean, if there was no hope or no hype for a guy like Lytle, they wouldn't move him. Okay. So they're trying to find a role. If you guys remember, this was a big time recruiting win for Wisconsin. He had a ton of offers. He had a Clemson offer. He was a very high 3-star out-of-state kid. He's played at outside linebacker, moved him to inside. He's got to make the move now. He's got to make the move. He's got recruiting pedigree. He's got a nice build. He's athletic enough. He's not super fast, but he's got a really good blend of size and athleticism, but he's got to make his move. And Njonmeta was a guy who came on, and a lot of people connected to the program, insiders, people that saw practice early on, really thought this guy was a steal. Kind of a missile, a little lighter, moves really well. They thought from the inside linebacker position, this is a guy who could really get into gaps and blitz, drop back in coverage. And then he got hurt. He had I believe it was a hernia. And then there was a follow-up procedure where they discovered a heart abnormality. And it seems like his entire career kind of got moved off the train tracks right there. And he has never gotten back to that hype level early on where people really thought this is the next great inside linebacker at Wisconsin. With his blend of athleticism, his blend of hitting power, of speed, it just hasn't happened. So both these guys are juniors. All right, let's talk about what's coming up behind them, because there's a quartet of inside linebackers that I think are phenomenal, young talents right at Wisconsin, and I like all of them. So you have Jake Chaney, who's a coach's son. He reminds me a ton of Chris Orr. Played last year. They found a way to get him on the field. The coaching is apparently really like him. He's more of a thumper. You have Jake Ratzlaff, who was the 4-star Minnesota kid, who everybody seems to love. Recruiting analysts love. He could have been, he was in the hockey, or he was in the discussion to be drafted highly in the NHL draft. He ended up coming to Wisconsin. That's a 4-star inside linebacker. You have Brian Sanborn, which is Jack Sanborn's little brother. Again, very highly thought of recruiting win. Probably not quite as athletic as his older brother, but still somebody that has a lot of juice. And then you got a guy who, at the end of last year, he stepped on the field and everyone said, whoa, this guy plays at a different speed, and that's Turner. Yeah. So you have these 4 inside linebackers breathing down Njonmeta's back, breathing down Lytle's back. And if they don't make a move now, let's say this year starts and Turner is a starter and, I don't know, Tatum Grass, who's a walk-on, or, maybe it's Turner and Chaney. If Lytle and Njonmeta aren't starting this year, I don't see a path where they're going to be starting next year, right? That's just kind of how this works. So this is huge for them. This is their opportunity to carve out that spot and kind of hold off these younger guys that all have quite a bit of hype and quite a bit of potential. This is a loaded position, right? And we talked about this with offensive line. We talked about this with outside linebacker too. Unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, right? Double-edged sword. Wisconsin has recruited exceptionally well at a few spots. Inside linebacker is one of them. People are probably going to transfer, and it's going to kind of stink because they're all good players, right? We're going to see a couple of these dudes. Again, I don't want it to happen. I'm not predicting who will. I would love for all these dudes to be Badgers for the rest of their career, but we got to realize some of these guys are probably going to transfer. They're going to go somewhere else, and some of them might ball out where they go. It is what it is. Players want to play, and there's not enough spots here. So Lytle and Njonmeta have to make a move this year. Let's get into one more on the defensive side, because I'll be honest, a lot of players on the defensive side, excuse me, I don't think a lot of players on the defensive side are really in this make or break spot, right? The outside linebackers, for the most part, are still pretty young, except for Herbig and Getz, and those guys are both playing. So I don't see any outside linebackers that are kind of in this make or break. You need to make an immediate jump spot now. Same with the secondary. Most of the secondary is pretty young, except for the transfers who are all gone next year. So all those young secondary guys, there's not this huge pressure for them to play this year, right? Because they're going to be able to compete for a bunch of positions or a bunch of playing time next year with all those transfers leaving. Right. Alexander Smith is a senior. He's obviously going to play, so he's not really in a make or break spot. He's already kind of cemented a role in the secondary for this season. The other spot, though, I want to talk about, defensive end. I think there's a guy, Issac Townsend, who last year we brought him in as an Oregon transfer. He's somebody that I actually really kind of liked it. He's a taller, bigger, defensive end, has a little more length, maybe a little bit more in the Loudermilk, Cade Mcdonald type of a mold. Is at that outside, strong side defensive end spot. And he didn't really play much last year. I got the impression that he maybe didn't flash a ton in practice either. It's really this year where he needs to make a jump. And that doesn't mean he needs to be a starter, right? Because Isaiah Mullins is on the defensive line this year, Rodas Johnson. Those are probably the two starting defensive ends. There's no reason for Townsend to have to overtake one of those guys. There's a lot of playing time available on a defensive line where you're rotating people continually. But if he doesn't carve out a significant role this year, it's going to be hard for me to see where a lot of that playing time is going to come next year. Obviously, Mullins is going to leave, but Rodas is going to be back next year. Isaiah Townsend will be a senior next year. He's not going to overtake Rodas Johnson, I don't believe. And then behind Rodas Johnson, you have guys like James Thompson, who the coaching staff seems to love. He hasn't been able to get healthy, but he's healthy now. I think he's probably penciled in for a big-time role this year and next year. Then you also have Mike Jarvis, who came in last year and came in apparently more advanced than people thought. He's big. He's a total strong side defensive end. He's a guy who can definitely make a jump. And then there's also the other guy is Cade Mcdonald, who's another taller, big framed kid, somebody who really, really seems to have a future in the program. So you have these three younger guys behind Townsend. There's only one spot available next year because Rodas Johnson's going to be a starter. I think it's a tough spot for Townsend if he doesn't make a jump this year. So just to recap it, I think it's the inside linebacker spot where Lytle and Njonmeta, they have to make a move this year. They have to. And then at the defensive end spot, I think Townsend, this is the year, if he doesn't carve out a role this year, I'm a little hesitant to see exactly where that role comes in the future. Coming up, guys, we're going to do the same on the offensive side. Some really interesting skill position talent that, again, if they don't make it happen this year, if that jump doesn't happen, I'm not sure where it's going to come. But first, today's show, as always, is brought to you by one of our favorite sponsors, BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. And we get it. College football's over. We're all sad about it. I get withdrawals right after March, right? It's like you get that injected into your vein, March Madness, and then it's suddenly cut off, and it's terrible. But BetOnline is here to help you with all your other sports betting needs. And look at what's coming up on the docket. Basketball playoffs, the NBA is about to jump off, and this year's NBA playoffs is going to be ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Baseball just started. You can always get into NFL futures, right? If you really want to jump on something that's interesting, Bengals plus 1,100 to win the AFC. Listen, I know people think it's going to be the Bills. I know people think it's going to be the Chiefs. If you get the Bengals at plus 1,100, that's something to look into. And you can get all that at BetOnline. Again, it's your number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. It's not just football or not just sports either. All your casino games, blackjack, roulette. You head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn about all the trends in action, all the props, all the futures. BetOnline remains our choice for for online betting. It's a phenomenal website. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, let's get into kind of our final section here. A continuation of make or break players. Excuse me, players that have to make a jump this season. Offensively, let's start with Julius Davis at the running back spot. And I think this one's kind of self-explanatory, right? You have Braylon Allen, who's going to be here next year. But Julius Davis, with some of the injuries to Isaac Guerendo, with Ches Malusi still being out, this is really his spring to hopefully cement some type of role. Because if he doesn't do it now, he's a junior. Remember, Julius has been in the program for a while. He's a junior. He's been hit with injuries. If he doesn't cement that role now, Guerendo is supposed to be back for fall. Malusi is supposed to be back for the start of the season. So already there's your top 3 backs, right? And Braylon's going to be back next year. You have Brady Shipper, who's still going to carve out a role. Wisconsin likes him as that third down guy. And Cade Eccamelli is apparently coming in as a running back, the athlete out of Pennsylvania. He could have been a receiver, a safety, a running back, very, very athletic kid. He's coming into the pipeline, and I think they're going to try to find a role for him. I think he's too athletic to stay on the sidelines. So to me, this is just the opportunity of his Wisconsin career for Julius Davis. If he doesn't find a way in this spring, in this practice setting right now, while the other 2 dudes, Guerendo and Malusi, are out, if he can't carve out a role right now, I don't think it's going to happen this fall. I just don't think it's going to. And Jackson Akers, another guy who's playing fullback / running back. We're not exactly sure where his role is going to be, but they're going to find carries for him. He's an explosive big athlete, right? He's not the thumper, and taking nothing away from like John Chanel, who was just a big thumper. But Jackson Akers is a better athlete. They're going to find carries for him. So there's not going to be much for Julius Davis if he can't right now establish a little bit of consistency, show the coaches that he's ready for a bigger role. Because it's not going to happen later down the road if you can't do it now when there's more backs back in the mix. This is also going to be a recruiting cycle where, Wisconsin didn't hit the running back recruiting market very hard last year. They didn't bring anybody in as a pure running back. And Eccamelli is an athlete that I think they're going to play there. They're going to hit the recruiting this year. They're going to hit that position pretty hard. They're going to bring in 1 player or 2 players. So Julius Davis has to make a move. And so far, we've seen some reports that he's been playing well in practice. The spring practice, he's getting a lot of reps. He's ripped off some runs. Definitely some things there that we'd like to see. I hope he continues. He's an in-state kid, and he's stuck with the program. Easy guy to root for. So I hope it happens. But this is definitely a make or break spring for Julius Davis. Receivers. Big spring for Dean Ingram. Right, Dean Ingram, obviously the guy who moved over from cornerback. He's been kind of a slot nickel cornerback for a couple of years now for Wisconsin, and quite frankly, showed up pretty well. When he moved to receiver, a lot of people, myself included, kind of raised they furrowed their brows a little bit, right? Like, this is an established player in the secondary, and we're going to move him to receiver. Now, Dean Ingram did play some receiver in high school. He has good hands. His dad, obviously, Bobby Ingram, is coming over as the offensive coordinator, so there's an obvious connection there. But if he doesn't make a jump and really carve out playing time as a receiver this year, again, it's kind of hard seeing where that's going to come from with all the young receiving talent that is coming into the program. You have Tommy McIntosh, Vinny Anthony, Chris Brooks, just from this last class, all guys we kind of like, Skylar Bell and Marcus Allen, 2 young guys who are really going to seize bigger roles. You still have Chimere Dike for this year and next year. This is going to be tough. It's going to be tough for Dean Ingram to find that role. And Stephen Bracy's out there as well, who's hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's another guy that we really liked when he committed. We thought he could be that slot receiver. It's really those 2 guys that have to make some noise. And unfortunately for Bracy, he's hurt. So that's out of his control. He can't do it. But Dean Ingram, if he can kind of carve out that role this year, then that's going to carry over into next year. And he's going to be, I think, probably be able to hang on to that. And so far in spring practice, we've heard some really good reports about his ability, his fluidity, his ability to kind of stay on the field and be that slot receiver potentially. Definitely a guy, again, who played that role in high school. Somebody who, has good hands and is a good athlete in space. So Dean Ingram's in that role. Let's jump into the last one that I have, and this is the big one, right? Logan Brown. Logan Brown is definitely a guy who, listen, we know the story with Logan Brown. 5-star, true 5-star tackle out of Michigan. One of the biggest recruiting wins in Wisconsin, not in that cycle, not in the last 5 years. One of the biggest recruiting wins in the history of Wisconsin football. Okay, that's Logan Brown. And he hasn't been able to get on the field. He's a junior this year. This is really his last chance because we have a ton of talent behind him, right? We've talked about all the 4- and 5-star offensive linemen, specifically tackles that have stacked up in this program. And Logan Brown, his first year, there was a COVID year. He had a shoulder injury, which kept him out an entire season. He's had bad luck. This is not all on Logan Brown. Okay, he's had bad luck, shoulder injury, but he's healthy now. They put him at right tackle, which I think he's better suited to play on the right side than the left side. I think he's more of a mauling tackle than that kind of fleet-footed ballerina, on the left tackle side, where you have to be a little quicker, a little faster. You're matching him against the best pass rusher on the other side. Brown's not that. I think he's more of the big mauling presence in the run game that can hold his own in the pass game, but he's got to prove it. He's got to stay healthy. And it's going to be a battle for him this year. It's not going to be given to him. Right now, he's at right tackle, but keep in mind, Tippmann's out. Joe Tippmann is going to be a starting player on this offensive line this year. I guarantee that. And it's probably going to be at center, potentially at guard. I think Tippmann's going to be the center, and that's going to kick Bortolini somewhere. Bortolini can play tackle. So if Logan Brown doesn't win that role this year, what does that mean? Because you got to keep in mind, Trey Wettig, Jack Nelson, Nolan Rucci, all these guys, all these young Riley Mullman are all 4 or 5-star tackles lining up behind him. Joe Bruner just last class. Young guys are going to be time, right? And I don't know what you're going to do with Logan Brown if he can't win, one of those roles this season. Potentially moves into guard, right? That's possible, but I think it's a stretch. So, just to recap, I think it's Julius Davis who needs to make at least make the coaches know this spring that he's ready to go. It's the receivers, Bracy, and specifically Dean Ingram. And then it's Logan Brown, who, if he can't carve out a role this year, kind of really start to make that happen, I doubt it's going to happen next year. And I hate to say that because when you bring in a 5-star kid, you just expect future NFL first, second, third round pick, but they don't all work out like that. Unfortunately, we're all rooting for him. He's had bad luck. But that's it, guys. Coming up on future shows of Wisconsin, our Locked On Badgers, we're going to continue to get into spring football. We're going to do some basketball recaps. The NFL draft's coming up. We have some really interesting guests next week that you're going to want to tune in for. Guys with a lot of unique insight into the NFL draft analytics. We're going to jump into Leo Chanel on those shows and really kind of get where his ceiling in the draft is. Thanks, as always, guys, for listening to Locked On Badgers, making it your first listen every day. If you want to reach out to us, reach out to the show. Let us know what you think. On Gmail, we're lockedonbadgers@gmail.com. On Twitter, it's Locked On Badgers at Twitter. And if you want to follow the show on YouTube, please subscribe, leave a comment. It helps the show tremendously. We'll get back to those and we'll answer any questions you have on air. And thanks, as always, again, for listening. We really appreciate it. Make Locked On NFL Draft your second listen of the day. Ryan Tracy and former cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts.